Welcome everyone. It's a fantastic occasion. It's great to have Mohammed Hanif here. It's fantastic to have Richard Fredman here. Many of you are probably already fans of Hanif's two books, and by tomorrow evening you're going to be a very, very big fan of Richard Fredman. His play Four for Jericho is tomorrow evening's performance. I'm told by everyone who saw it at Edinburgh that it's shocking, it's scandalous, it's incredibly funny, adjectives that are often also used for Hanif's books. I want to ask Richard a question. Why is the Jewish Chronicle about to declare a fatwa on you?
The Jewish Chronicle, for some of you may not know, is a publication for the Jewish community in Britain. And I was brought up in the Jewish tradition, so I know it from the inside. But I have offended the tribe, and I have strayed beyond the boundaries of that which is deemed appropriate. So I've made a couple of errors. The first one was to stage a production of Fiddler on the Roof, which is like a Jewish nativity play, and at the end of the piece used some images. They weren't artistically very subtle, I have to say, but some images to point out the irony of the story of Fiddler on the Roof is about Jewish refugees having to flee the pogroms in Russia from 1905. Many of them, of course, went to Palestine and began to buy up land there and settle there, and that over the next century has led to a wave of refugees from Palestine who can now not return to their homes. So I felt that it was only appropriate to point out that irony, but it didn't go down very well in certain quarters. So in fact, if you Google me, I think one of the first things that comes up is a diatribe against me from the Jewish Chronicle, which if they could declare a fatwa, I'm sure they would.
I believe the phrase was anti-Zionist and vested interests and hidden motives.
And anti-Semitic.
And anti-Semitic.
So there's a whole concept in modern Zionism of what is called the new anti-Semitism and of the self-hating Jew. So there's anti-Semitism that has always been around in various societies in various forms, but Jews who dare to speak out against any of the actions of the Israeli state or to question the ethos of Zionism run the risk of being accused of being overtly anti-Semitic. Anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism for some people are exactly the same thing.
This thing that you say about it seemed only appropriate to make this remark on this irony. Do you sometimes think that what is blindingly, obviously, incredibly funny to satirists are just not funny to anyone else sometimes?
Well, that's always, it's a risk that you run, isn't it? One can never predict other people's sense of humor. And I suppose people select the art that they go to, and if you know something's going to be satirical or has been called outrageous, or a television program is, you either turn the channel on or you don't. But it is extraordinary how some people love to be offended and then to take umbrage at it. There was a case in England quite recently where a couple of radio journalists made a prank call, and they were quite rude to the granddaughter of a well-known TV star, Andrew Sachs, and apparently 3 people complained out of the tens of thousands who were listening to the program. But thereafter, once the complaint had been mentioned and taken up in further news reports, thousands of people then complained who had never even heard the original broadcast. So there's, I don't know if it works that way in India or elsewhere, but there's a facet of the British psyche that just wants to be outraged and offended and then to do something about it.
Then I'm hoping this is not your chance to say that outrage is a British legacy as well as cricket and a lot of other things.
Sorry, say that again?
Is this you saying that outrage is a British legacy in the subcontinent, just like cricket?
That's our what is a legacy? Sorry, say it again?
No, never mind. I won't go there again.
It's very, very echoey. I didn't quite hear the question.
I was wondering whether you're saying that outrage and our desire to be offended in the subcontinent is also a British legacy.
Well, it may well be, but it's up to you to decide how how much you like to be offended and then complain about it, is the question. Is that a big facet of Indian society?
Oh, we love being offended. We love it.
Did you learn it from the British, or was it already there?
Hanif, I wanted to ask you, how old were you when you first realized that what you thought was darkly, sadly, hilarious was just sad for someone else?
I don't think I'm old enough. I still haven't realized that. No, I think what I find strange is because I only sort of found out that I was writing satire when I read the reviews of my book. I just thought I was writing a sort of proper, classical, beautiful, novel with some fascinating characters, just the right amount of sex in it. And then you read reviews and say this is darkly comical kind of take on contemporary Pakistan. And then you say, that's me then. But I don't really know. I don't think I kind of particularly sit down sort of to say that, okay, I am going to write a bit of satire today. You're just invested in a story. You're just fascinated with some characters, and you kind of, try them out on the page. But some people, I think, have this compulsion that they can't keep a straight face for long. You must have seen them, like, they're saying something very serious, and suddenly, sort of, they'll be like, what the hell am I saying? Or something like that. So I think you go through those moments. There are situations which are very, very serious. And in fact, they're unbearably serious. And you can't take them personally. So that's where kind of that humor,
a bit of an escape.
Yeah, that's where you get into that mode. I don't really know. I haven't decided yet that whether it's all completely sad or just stupid, because sometimes that is the case. Because what happened with my first book was that after people said that it was dark humor and it was satirical, then you would expect that people would take it as a joke, that sort of somebody just made a bad joke. If you like it, laugh at it. If you don't like it, just walk away in disgust. But the reaction that I got in Pakistan was a bit disturbing, because those of you who haven't read it, it's a story set in the 80s where sort of a bunch of people are trying to kill a military dictator whose name I use and who was there. So it's a complete kind of fantasy. It's written in first person, so I'm supposed to be the protagonist. I'm supposed to be one of the potential killers. And people liked it, said nice things about it. And then what started happening was that people would say, but it's all true, isn't it? And I would say, no. And first it was like just regular, normal people. And then I started running into these so-called important people, like bureaucrats and retired generals. And you would run into them like at some kind of something like this, and they would put their arm around your shoulder and take you in a corner and say, Beta, who told you all this? This is all fascinating. And I was like, dude, you were there. And you believe it. So that I find slightly first just a bit creepy, and then actually scary that these people are supposed to be running my life and they believe all this nonsense that I've written on the page. So
from what I understand, you're saying that the conspiracy theories that are floating about in Pakistan are at least as colorful as your book then.
I think many of them are way more colorful. Like I had to stop myself, restrain myself at some point. I was in fact looking at this mic and listening to him talking about Zionism, and I said, is this a Star of David? What's going on here? So we all kind of have these things. It's not true about Pakistan. I think one would have thought that when you live in this information age where kind of, everything can be checked and double-checked, what we've seen is that, in fact, those conspiracy theories have multiplied and they kind of gain much more currency than they did in the past, because in kind of old times, like when I was young, you would start a rumor in a village and it would just stay in the village, or at the most travel to the next village. And now you start a rumor like in my drawing room, and it would be sort of
Wikipedia.
Wherever. So I think you have a huge appetite for that kind of thing. I don't know why. I'm sure there are like social scientists who are kind of working on it right now. As we speak.
Currently examining your predilection for this. Yeah, I'm sure. In fact, I did want to ask you this. If you had to pick for a writer, if you had to pick between a very sanitized, airless, politically correct society and a society where you might be beaten up, shot, have bricks flung on you for writing what you write, which one is worse for a writer?
God, only like a cold, heartless journalist would give you a choice like that. I mean, why do I have to choose? I mean, that's a completely false choice. No, as a citizen, obviously, I want my kid to be safe. I want to be able to kind of go out anytime, night, and I want to read and write good books. Since when did we have to kind of make a compromise on that kind of thing? But people do tend to think that if you live in a really fucked up society, you can write better books. I mean, not true. I mean, every kind of Rwandan would have been a novelist by now if that was the case, but that hasn't happened. So I don't really sort of believe in that. People kind of keep saying that since you kind of live in such a sort of volatile region. Basically, what they're saying is that your lives are really messed up. Hence, sort of you write. No, if you live in a city like Karachi, for example, and you start your day like you drop your kid to office and you kind of walk your dog, things like all middle class type people do, and then you sit down on your desk, and something kind of blows up randomly, as things do in Pakistan. I mean, do you think you're going to think, oh, that's going to be a good writing day because I live in a troubled society? I mean, you're going to be worried about, your friends and your family and your kid, like, and, sort of everything else. So, I don't think that is the case.
Richard, what about you? In this heartless choice that I offer, I don't want to leave you out of it. In the politically correct society that you live in, what are things do you think you would not survive writing about? I don't mean death, but a sort of Roman Polanski-ish exile. What are the things that you would not survive writing about?
Well, in this deliciously anodyne world that you conjure up, it's going to be politically correct because people have either had a lobotomy or anybody who says anything worth saying gets locked up. It's not going to be a very nice place to be. It conjures up Brave New World, it conjures up Soma capsules, and I don't want to live there any more than Aldous Huxley would have wanted to do. So I'd be with the savage ranting Shakespeare in the wild, I think, on that occasion. Equally, I don't particularly want to have my windows bricked in or my family abducted for writing things. And if I were in such a society, then I would have to think very, very carefully about what I wrote, and I am a craven coward, so I would probably hide. And I would leave it up to the very, very brave people who, over the decades and the centuries, have stuck their heads above the parapet in so many of our societies and have dared to write things that have got them tortured and killed. Or they're very, very brave and we owe them a huge debt. So I don't think I am that person, but we never know until the moment happens, do we? So I just hope that I'm never confronted with that choice.
You see yourself as part of a long tradition of satire. I mean, you admire Dario Fo, Molière, Aristophanes, you said. Do you think every society really needs a big dose of satire? Or, earlier you said something about, there are plays about the Holocaust which are worthy and full of sentiment, and I heard a sort of giggle somewhere there. But do you think we also need worthy and full of sentiment literature to sort of balance it out?
Well, I think there are all sorts of different ways in which particular issues can be tackled. The Holocaust is a case in point, the Nazi Holocaust, and Steven Spielberg made Schindler's List, and it's a great film, and for many people it's information, for many people it's really taken them to that time and given them an understanding in a way that they otherwise wouldn't have had, but it is sentimental. It does romanticize certain aspects. But in terms of satire and the fool, I do think there is a need. and it's one that has existed in the European tradition for centuries and centuries. I don't know about the tradition over here, but Shakespeare had his fools, and if we go further back, I went to a little German port of Lübeck many, many years ago, and there's a little statue of a guy in a jester's outfit from about 1300 with a little mirror on a stick, and he's waving it at us. And the idea is that we should go and have a look in his mirror. He's called Eulenspiegel, which is the owl mirror, and we should look in his distorted mirror and see ourselves as we really are. So the idea that distortion actually tells us the truth, or more of the truth about ourselves than a realistic reality. I mean, in a sense, perhaps, Hanif, what's happened for you is you wrote in a distorted way that got at a particular truth, and other people have deemed that satire. But I think it's a brave. The reason why we like King Lear, for example, if we do, he's a cantankerous old patriarch, but somehow we can like aspects of him because he has a fool, and he lets the fool mock him. He lets the fool tell him the truth. It's true, he then has him whipped for it, but he does let him tell him the truth. And I think that tradition that carries on through Commedia dell'arte and into Molière, and then in the last century, people like Dario Fo from Italy, who was the scourge of the Catholic Church and the establishment in Italy. His work was banned on television there for decades. I think societies need such people, but we also need to be able to tolerate them, and it's a measure of democracy and tolerance in a society if it can withstand satire.
You have a day job, as you said. You teach in a school in Cambridge. In that process, I mean, as an escape valve perhaps, and also as part of your education process, how does satire feed into that? Apart from the fact that there are just endless jokes about being a school teacher.
Well, I love satirical work and work that is irreverent. So I'm in the unusual position of having lots of young people, mostly 17, 18, 19, and I encourage them to be irreverent. And of course, sometimes that is, I am the butt of that irreverence. But they will hide from me, and I'll be halfway through a class before I realize that 5 of them are behind the curtain. But I enjoy that. I enjoy the game, the playfulness, and that it brings the situation to life. So I like to, and if you have it in your theatre work, it's very difficult to keep it out of your life as well.
You said something about using it to fight bullying?
Oh, yeah. I was telling Nisha before that, was that me? That one of the ways I tried to help some of my children defend themselves against bullying at school was by asking them to offend me. And by the time someone has told you that you're ugly, stupid, fat, thick, old, bald, and you've agreed with everything they say, then they run out of steam. They simply can't keep going. And for me, offensiveness is a little bit like that. Is if we can get beyond the initial and actually think, it's fine, and then we find that we can no longer be offended, and if you can't be offended, then you're much stronger. So I use it as a kind of little anti-bullying training.
Hanif, you were saying something, I think a few days ago, about how when you go to drop your son off at school, you discover that you have these teenage readers who want to discuss Exploding Mangoes and perhaps now Alice Butty with you. What is your response to finding 17-year-old fans who are there?
At first I was kind of freaked out. I do get freaked out quite easily, but my book is kind of, it's set in the 80s and it's a political book. So I thought when I was writing it that people kind of like myself who were either around that period or people who are kind of interested in politics or sort of journalist types, maybe they will read it. But increasingly, when I kind of started doing readings in Pakistan, I discovered that many of the people who turned up for these readings were practically kids, like people in their teens or even in their early 20s. So I didn't quite know why this was happening. And then I started getting happy. As I said, I have a young son, so when I go to drop him to school, so kids would come up to me. I would take him to one of those playground type scenes, and it was guaranteed that that was just about the only place where I would be recognized. So I became like, sort of one of those D-list celebrity for a couple of months. But very recently, I was doing this reading type thing, and one teenager stood up. He said that you use a lot of F words in your writing. Is that deliberate to attract a younger audience? And I said, well, now I think that's probably explains it. That's why they read. That's why they read it, because they think it's just bad for them. It acquires kind of the kind of reputation, and then they pass it on to kind of their other friends, and that's how I think it goes. But I think also kids, especially middle class kids who go to like schools. They are kind of interested in finding out about, sort of what happened 20 years ago, or what is happening beyond my comfort zone. And I think they read my books and some other books to kind of, find that out, because the kind of world we live in, for them to kind of get out of their bubble and go and experience that real life would be very difficult. And most readers are like that. I mean, compulsive readers, people who kind of read novels or read books. I mean, that is basically their escape from real life. So I think that's what those kids are doing. I sometimes worry about them, that what's going to happen to them when they grow up. But then sometimes I'm encouraged by the fact that, look, they're very young, they're going to be around for 40 years, so I can probably write another few books and sell it to them. So that's my pension plan, basically.
On that very happy pension plan note, let's draw this conversation to an end. Thank you very much, both of you.
Can I just mention
Sure,
before we finish,
sure.
sorry, it seems ironic that outside there's a billboard describing me as an outrageous satirist, which I was terribly honoured to be described. I have a play on tomorrow night for Jericho, which I hope you will all come and see. There isn't time for a post-show discussion, but I'd love to hear what you think of it. There are bits of it that are perhaps outrageous and might be deemed to be offensive. So I don't know what the situation is here in India, and it's not my place to tell you at what pace you move with satire and irreverence, but I learned before I came off the platform that certain key phrases in the play are no longer allowed to be uttered in front of you. They involve prophets. There's a scene in which a Palestinian farmer is being abused by an Israeli settler and made to say offensive things to himself about Islam. If you look on YouTube, you will see that what I've put in the play is actually far less offensive than some of the absolutely repulsive stuff that actually goes on with the daily heckling and barracking and abuse of Palestinians living in the West Bank amongst or near the settlers. So I just raise it as an issue. Tonight we'll have to decide whether we replace the words, whether we have a silence, whether we have a little beep, which used to happen in England during the 1970s when anybody from the IRA spoke on television. Maybe we have another voice. I don't know. We'll have to think about it. I've only just learned that it's had to happen, and I don't know whether it's a legal thing in India. And as I say, it's not my place to tell you how to run it, and I don't want to throw my dummy in the dirt and storm off and have a tantrum. I just raise it to you as it strikes me as ironic that the play is brought here because it's outrageous and satirical, but a little bit of it is now going to be censored. So sorry to bring that bad news, but thank you.
I wanted to suggest to Richard perhaps that's part of the Indian experience. So we're just giving you the full-on treatment.
If you meet me in the foyer afterwards, I'll tell you which words are missing.
I think you were talking about cricket and outrage being kind of some kind of thing. So it seems like cricket now, outrage can also be fixed. Something like that.
Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.